The flowers were wrong, and I was the only one who knew it. Not wrong in any way a guest would notice, not wrong in a way that would register on the photographs, or the memory reels, or the social columns that would inevitably run pieces about the wedding of Seraphine Vale the following morning. But wrong in the way that a floral designer who has spent 6 years building other people's perfect days learns to read. The white peonies at the chapel entrance were arranged with military precision. Every stem turned to face the aisle at exactly the same angle, every ribbon tied with mechanical uniformity, and there was not a single imperfect petal allowed to breathe. It was beautiful the way a controlled environment is beautiful. It was beautiful the way a cage with gilded bars is beautiful, if you do not think too long about what is inside it. I had been there since 5 in the morning. The Verano Grande, a coastal resort perched above the gray Atlantic on a stretch of cliff that looked like something from a dream someone had paid a great deal of money to make real, had contracted my studio for the floral design and on-site event assistance. It was the biggest commission of my year, possibly of my career, and my hands had not stopped moving since I arrived. I was tying ribbon ends and repositioning centerpieces and answering questions from caterers and redirecting confused ushers and pretending I was not utterly terrified of the scale of the thing. Outside, the sky had been threatening rain since dawn, rolling in low and dark from the sea, and the event coordinator, a reed-thin man named Piers, who communicated primarily in controlled panic, had been watching the clouds every 20 minutes with the expression of a man waiting to be executed. I caught my first real glimpse of the bride at 10:30. She was standing in the wide corridor outside the bridal suite with her back to me, looking through a floor-to-ceiling window at the ocean. Her dress was extraordinary. Ivory silk with a cathedral train that spread around her feet like water, the bodice embroidered with seed pearls that caught the gray morning light and threw it back as something almost warm. Her hair was swept up in a complicated arrangement that must have taken her stylist over an hour. At her throat, diamonds. At her wrist, diamonds. On her left hand, a ring that probably cost more than my entire flower studio. She was not moving. I mean that precisely. She was standing absolutely still in the middle of a corridor full of motion. Assistants scurrying past. A florist carrying a basket of white roses, her own mother's personal assistant, trying to get her attention to put out something on a clipboard. And she was standing still the way a person stands still when they are the only one who can hear a sound no one else can hear. Her shoulders were set in a careful line, her chin was tilted at exactly the correct angle, and yet, I noticed it the way I always notice, the things I am not supposed to notice, the things that no one pays me to see. She was gripping the window ledge with both hands, the knuckles white, the tendon showing through the silk of her gloves. Not tight enough to seem dramatic, not obvious enough to alarm anyone who was not paying close attention. Just tight enough to tell me that the woman was hanging on. I kept walking. It was not my place. I had 3 more centerpieces to adjust in the chapel, and a brideside floral arch that had shifted overnight in the humidity. And I did not have time to stand in the corridor thinking about the private grief of wealthy women who were about to marry powerful men in front of 300 people. Before we return to the story, I just want to share a quick note. This version is made for YouTube, but the uncensored GL scenes and hotter videos will be available on my Patreon. Some moments are too spicy to include here, so if you want the fuller and bolder version, you can find the details in the description below. I was in the chapel, repositioning the arch, when the first whisper reached me. It came from one of the younger assistants, a girl named Priya, who had been assigned to run messages between the bridal suite and the catering tent. She appeared at my elbow, with her eyes wide and her voice pulled very low. "Have you seen the bride? I had a stem of white delphinium in my hand, about an hour ago." "Why? She's not in her suite." "Her mother is in the corridor, and she is trying to be quiet about it, but she is not being very quiet about it." I looked up from the flowers. Through the tall chapel windows, I could see the gray sky pressing lower, the light going dim and greenish the way it does before a storm breaks in earnest. The ceremony was supposed to begin in 40 minutes. I told Priya to find Piers. I finished repositioning the arch. Then I started walking. The bridal suite had the particular quality of a room that has been recently and abruptly abandoned. The vanity littered with makeup tools, a half-drunk glass of champagne sweating on the windowsill, a white satin robe discarded across the chaise longue in a way that suggested the person who had been wearing it had not taken it off carefully. The door to the garden terrace was not fully closed. I could hear wind through it. Celeste Vale was seen in the center of the room, holding a phone to her ear with one hand and holding her other hand out flat at her side, a gesture that seemed to mean "do not speak to me right now," directed at the 4 people in the room who were, in fact, not speaking to her. She was a striking woman, Seraphine's mother. Late 50s, diamond-hard composure, silver blonde hair swept back from a face that had been kept carefully expressionless, for so long it had settled that way permanently. She looked at me when I appeared in the doorway, assessed me in approximately 1 second, and decided I was of no consequence. I was used to that. The wedding ring was gone from the vanity. I only knew it had been there because Priya had mentioned it earlier in the morning, had shown it to me in passing the way that people sometimes share beautiful things with whoever happens to be near. A solitaire diamond on a platinum band so perfectly proportioned, it looked less like jewelry and more like a fact. Something inevitable that was now not where it was supposed to be. I looked at the floor near the terrace door, and there it was. It had been set down, not dropped, not thrown, not lost in the normal sense. Set down deliberately in the small gap between the edge of the Persian rug and the cold marble of the terrace step, partially hidden under the edge of a crushed white rose that had fallen from a bouquet on the side table. It sat there in the gray light with a quality that made my throat close slightly, small, expensive, perfect, and utterly unwanted. I picked it up, I held it in my palm. It was heavier than it looked, the way things that are meant to be permanent always are. I went through the terrace door. The garden of the Verano Grande in a building storm is not the garden it is in the promotional photographs. The manicured roses were being tossed sideways. By the wind, the white pebbled paths were wet, and the hedgerows that were supposed to give the ceremony garden its sense of elegant enclosure were shaking with an anxiety that felt, in that moment, almost companionable. The rain had not yet started properly, but the air was so heavy with it that being outside was only marginally drier than being inside a cloud. I found her at the far edge of the garden, where the hedge gave way to a low stone wall, and beyond the wall the cliff path dropped toward the sea. She was standing with her back to the estate, still in her wedding dress, and the wind was pulling at her train and her veil and the perfect arrangement of her hair, and she did not seem to care at all. She was soaked to the bone from the spray and the mist, both hands braced on the stone wall, and she was breathing in a way that told me she had been crying recently and was trying very hard not to cry again. I stopped a few feet away from her. She heard me. Her shoulders tightened. She said without turning around, "Whatever my mother has sent you to say, I am not going back." "Your mother didn't send me," I said. A pause. She turned her head slightly, enough to see me from the corner of her eye. She did not recognize me, which was expected. I was the floral designer, and she was the bride, and there was an entire world of social distance between those two facts. "Then who are you?" she said. "Rowan Bell, I did the flowers." I found this on the floor near the terrace door. I held out my hand, the ring sitting in my palm. "I thought it should go back to whoever it belongs to." She turned all the way around then. Her face was astonishing. The kind of beautiful that does not require maintenance or ideal conditions, the kind that persists through tears and rain, and the particular catastrophe of a wedding that is not happening. But it was the expression on that face that stayed with me, not panic, not remorse. Not the fragile collapse of a woman who had simply gotten cold feet. It was something quieter and more absolute, the expression of someone who has made a decision they have been delaying for years, and is only now, in this moment, allowing themselves to feel the relief of it. She looked at the ring in my hand. She looked at it the way you look at an artifact from a life that is no longer yours. "I left it on purpose," she said. "I know," I said. "That's why I came to give it back." "What you do with it is your choice, not mine." Something changed in her face. It was subtle, a softening around the eyes, the tiniest loosening of a jaw that had been held very tight for a very long time. Like the first creak in a door that has been sealed against a draft. "You're not going to tell me to go back inside. That's not my job." "Everyone else here seems to think it is. I didn't say anything to that." The wind came up hard from the sea and drove the first real rain sideways against both of us, and I stood there getting wet in my black event assistant apron and held out the ring and waited. She reached out and took it, held it between two fingers. Looked at it with an expression so complicated I would have needed a week to name all the feelings in it. Then she looked at me. "I need to leave," she said, "right now. I need to be somewhere that is not here. A beat. Would you?" She stopped, looked away. Seemed to make some internal calculation that clearly made no logical sense, and did not care. "I know this is insane. I know you do not know me. I know I have absolutely no right to ask this." Her eyes came back to mine. "Will you disappear with me, please? Not forever. Just far enough away that no one can bring me back tonight." The rational answer was no. The rational answer was, "I am an event contractor with a signed agreement and a professional reputation, and a sister who will scream at me, and you are a woman I have spoken 30 words to, and disappearing with a runaway bride was not part of my contract." I looked at her. I looked at the way she was shaking, not from cold, or not only from cold, and the way she had said please, with all the dignity of a person who rarely says it, and meant it down to the bone. I thought about the ring she had left on the floor on purpose. "My car is in the staff lot," I said. "It's a 2009 Civic and one of the back windows doesn't seal properly, and I have half a bag of potting soil in the boot." "That sounds," she said, with a shakiness that might have been the beginning of a laugh, "perfect." We did not run. Running would have made it obvious, and the garden path from the cliff wall back through the hedgerow to the staff parking area was long enough that we had perhaps 3 minutes before someone came looking. Seraphine walked, with her wedding dress gathered in both hands to keep it out of the puddles, and her cathedral veil trailing behind her, and I walked beside her, and the rain came down in earnest now, and I did not think about what I was doing. I only thought about the fact that I was doing it, which was a different thing entirely. I helped her into the passenger seat. The dress was a significant engineering challenge, but we managed it, the train and veil stuffed somewhat ignominiously around her feet, and across the back seat, the seat pulled all the way forward. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, and her eyes straight ahead, and I got in beside her and started the engine and pulled out of the staff. Lot at exactly the speed of a person who is not in any particular hurry, and has not just helped a bride escape from her own wedding. My phone started buzzing before we reached the main road. I glanced at the screen. Piers. I turned it face down on the dash. The coast road opened up ahead of us, gray and wet and empty, the sea to our left churning with the storm, the hedgerows on our right bending in the wind. Seraphine sat very still. The ring was in her lap, clenched in her right fist. "Where should I drive?" I said. A long pause. "Anywhere," she said. "Just not back." Somewhere in the first mile her phone began to ring. The sound from inside whatever pocket the dress designer had thought to include. And there was inexplicably a small hidden pocket in the side seam, and I would later come to find this detail charming in a way I could not quite explain. Was muffled and frantic. It rang, stopped, rang again. Then it rang with the particular insistence of someone who was not going to stop. "That's my mother," Seraphine said, without looking at it. "Do you want to answer it?" "No." A pause. "I want to turn it off, but I don't want to touch it." I kept my eyes on the road. Another mile. The rain was drumming on the roof of the Civic in a way that made the interior feel very small and very separate from everything outside it. Seraphine's breathing was becoming less controlled. I could hear it evening out into something ragged and thin. "You can cry," I said, "if you need to." "I won't watch." A sound from the passenger seat that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. Then, "I never cry in front of people." "That sounds exhausting." Another pause, and then she cried. Not noisily, not the heaving kind that would have worried me, but the quiet, wrung-out kind that suggests the tears have been pressed back for so long they have lost all their drama and come out simply because there is nowhere left for them to go. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and looked out at the gray sea, and I drove, and I did not watch. Her phone buzzed again. Without speaking, she reached into the pocket of her dress, looked at the screen, and turned it off. The silence after that was different. It had texture to it, that silence. It had weight and temperature, and the particular quality of something that has been chosen. "What was his name?" I asked after a while. "The man you were supposed to marry. Dominic Wren." She said it the way you say the name of a diagnosis. "He is very handsome and very successful and absolutely incapable of seeing me as anything other than the next step in his career plan. A beat." My mother approved of him enormously. "That tracks," I said. A glance from the passenger seat. "Are you always this honest with people you've known for 6 minutes?" "I'm a floral designer," I said. "I spend most of my time making things look beautiful for other people. I have very few illusions left." The road curved inland, away from the cliffs, and the worst of the rain eased slightly. I was thinking about where to take her. I had no plan. I had not had a plan since I picked up the ring from the floor of the bridal suite, and the absence of a plan felt, in that moment, like the most honest thing I had been in a long time. 40 minutes from the Verano Grande, on a stretch of the coast road that passed through a village so small it barely had a name, there was a diner I had stopped at twice before on the drive back from events. The Kettle and Cove. It was closed at this hour. It always closed at 3 in the afternoon, which was one of its more eccentric qualities. But the parking lot beside it was sheltered from the road by a row of overgrown hollies, and the light inside the small, closed sign in the window had the look of somewhere that had given up being impressive and was perfectly comfortable with that. I pulled in. Seraphine looked at the dark windows and the hand-painted sign and said, slowly, "Is this—" "It's closed," I said. "But the owner leaves the side porch door unlocked for the local fishermen to use when the storm comes in. I found it out by accident 2 years ago." I turned off the engine. "We can at least get out of the rain." She looked at me. A long look, the kind that seems to be checking for something specific. Then she said, "You are very strange, Rowan Bell." "I know," I said. "Do you want the shelter or not?" The side porch had 3 wooden chairs, a plastic table with a salt shaker welded to it by years of condensation, and a view of the empty parking lot and the storm. It was cold and unglamorous and smelled of sea and old fry oil. Seraphine sat in one of the wooden chairs in her ivory cathedral train wedding dress, with her soaked veil draped over the back of it, and her hands wrapped around the mug of tea I had managed to produce from a small electric kettle on the porch shelf, left there, presumably, by the fisherman, and she looked, somehow, entirely at ease. Or not at ease exactly, but present in herself in a way she had not seemed at the wedding. Less curated, more alive. I had given her my black event apron to wrap around her shoulders, which was not particularly warm, but was at least dry. My own blazer was soaked through. I was sitting across from her with my hands around my own mug of tea and trying not to think too carefully about the fact that by now, the Verano Grande was certainly in full crisis, that Pierce had almost certainly had some kind of episode, and that my professional reputation was in some jeopardy. "Tell me something true," Seraphine said suddenly. I looked up from my tea. "About what?" "Anything." "Something real. Everyone in my life tells me things that are true in the way that talking points are true. Technically accurate, but fundamentally empty." She looked at me over the rim of her mug with those dark, extraordinary eyes. "You haven't done that yet. I'd like you to keep not doing it." I thought about it. "I've been arranging flowers for other people's weddings for 6 years, I said. "I'm very good at it. And every time I do it, I go home afterward and eat cereal for dinner and watch something mindless on my laptop and feel like I've spent the day building a life that belongs to someone else." I paused. "That's probably more true than you needed. It's exactly as true as I needed," she said quietly. We sat with the rain. "Why him?" I asked. "If you knew." She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I've known since I was 22 that my mother expected me to marry someone useful." That's the word she uses, useful. A slight cold smile. "Dominic is useful in every way she values. He has connections she wants. He has an image she approves of. He will never embarrass the family by doing something as disruptive as—" She stopped. As running away from your own wedding, I offered. As wanting something for myself. She set the mug down. I kept telling myself I could do it. That it was just a marriage of convenience. That plenty of people managed perfectly well. That maybe I would learn to. She shook her head. I stood in that dressing room this morning, looking at myself in the mirror in that dress, and I thought, if I walk down that aisle, I will have agreed to spend the rest of my life being the thing my mother designed me to be. And I couldn't. Her voice was even controlled, but the words had a raw underside to them. I couldn't do it. I didn't say anything wise or comforting, because I didn't have anything wise or comforting to say. I said, good. She looked at me sharply. I mean it, I said. Good. That took. Whatever that took, it was worth doing. Seraphine looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked down at her lap where the ring was sitting. She had not put it on. She had not thrown it into the sea either, which I had half expected. She just held it, turning it once slowly between her fingers. What'd I do with this? She said. Tonight nothing, I said. Tonight it's just a ring. We found the motel 12 miles further down the coast, the Saltern's Rest, a low building from approximately 1978 that offered sea views from the car park if you squinted, and a vacancy sign that blinked with the dedication of someone who refuses to give up. It was not glamorous. The carpet in the rooms had the pattern of a thing that had been designed to hide stains, and the bedspread was aggressively floral in a way that had nothing to do with my professional opinion of flowers. The woman at the desk looked at Seraphine's wedding dress with no expression whatsoever, which suggested she had seen more unusual check-ins than this, and was not about to start being surprised now. I paid for 2 rooms. Seraphine produced a credit card from the impossible hidden pocket, and I did not argue, because arguing about who paid for the motel rooms while she was standing in a soaked wedding dress in a coastal motel lobby felt like misplacing the significance of the moment. In her room, a mirror image of mine, with the same aggressively floral bedspread. Seraphine stood in the center of the floor and seemed to realize for the first time the engineering problem of the dress. It was elaborate. The back was a long row of covered buttons that ran from the nape of her neck to the small of her back, over 50 of them, each one threaded with silked cord. Her stylist and her mother's assistant had presumably done them up that morning. They were not going to undo themselves. She looked at the mirrored closet door. Then she looked at me. I can do the buttons, I said before she had to ask. Turn around. I started at the top, working carefully, each small button through its loop in order. The silk was cold and damp against my fingers. Seraphine stood very still, her hands clasped lightly in front of her, looking straight ahead at the mirror. I did not look at her face in the mirror. I looked at my hands and the buttons. I was aware of her breathing and of the slight tremor in her spine that was not quite steadiness and not quite collapse, and I worked carefully and said nothing. When the last button came free, she held the dress to her chest with both hands, the bodice sagging away from her back. I stepped back. I went to the small wardrobe and found the complimentary bathrobe hanging on the inside of the door, white terry cloth, deeply unsexy, perfect, and held it out to her without turning around. A pause, the rustle of silk. Then, you can turn around. She was in the bathrobe, the wedding dress pooled on the floor around her feet, like something shed. Her hair had come half down, the careful arrangement destroyed by the rain, and without the formal architecture of the dress and the styling, she looked younger. More herself. She looked like a woman who had just put down something very heavy. Picked up the dress from the floor, shook it out, and draped it over the luggage rack by the window. Then I plugged in the motel hairdryer and aimed it at the veil, which was the most immediately salvageable part of the ensemble. Seraphine sat on the edge of the bed and watched me with an expression I couldn't read. You're being very calm, she said. One of us has to be. Aren't you worried about your job? Whatever the consequences are going to be for this? I turned off the hairdryer for a moment. Thought about it. Yes, I said honestly. I'm worried about all of those things. But you seemed like a woman in genuine distress, and the ring was on the floor, and I can't make myself care about my contract when the alternative was leaving you at the bottom of a cliff in a storm. She was quiet for a long time. Then, thank you, Rowan. It was the first time she'd used my name. It landed differently than I expected. "Get some sleep," I said. "Tomorrow things will look like what they actually are, instead of what the adrenaline is making them look like. And then we'll figure it out." She nodded. She lay down on top of the floral bedspread without getting under it, the bathrobe wrapped around her, and she was asleep, or close enough to it, before I reached the door. She looked, for the first time since I had found her at the cliff wall, like a person who was not bracing for impact. I went to my own room. I sat on the edge of my own aggressively floral bedspread and turned my phone back on and watched the notifications arrive. 11 missed calls from Piers, 4 from the venue. 2 from a number I didn't recognize, which would later turn out to be Dominic Wren's personal assistant. A text from my sister Leora. "What in the actual world is happening, Rowan? Because I just saw something about a missing bride on Twitter, and your name is mentioned in the comments, and I need you to call me right now." I texted Leora back, "I'm safe. I'll explain tomorrow. Don't worry." She responded in 40 seconds. "I am absolutely worrying. Call me." I did not call her. I set my phone on the nightstand and lay down on the bed without taking off my damp blazer and stared at the ceiling and thought about a woman with white-knuckled hands on a window ledge and a ring on the floor and the specific sound of someone's voice when they say please and mean it in every cell of their body. I slept badly. I was used to that. In the morning, the storm had passed. The light through the thin curtains was that particular pale gold of an Atlantic morning after rain. Clean and a little unreal, everything washed and distinct. I woke early and went down to the small breakfast area the Saltern's Rest offered, which consisted of a coffee machine of uncertain reliability, a basket of wrapped croissants, and a laminated sign that said, "Help yourself," in a font that suggested optimism. I made 2 coffees and carried them back up the corridor and knocked on Seraphine's door. A long pause, then footsteps. The door opened. She was still in the bathrobe. Her hair was entirely down now, dark and slightly wavy from sleeping on it damp. She had the slightly stunned look of someone who has woken in an unfamiliar place and is still cataloging the details of how that happened. She looked at the coffee in my extended hand. "Is it terrible?" she said. "Comprehensively," I said. She took it, took a sip, winced with the specific sorrow of someone who knows exactly what good coffee tastes like and is being made very aware of the distance. "Oh, that is, yes, that's quite bad. I know, drink it anyway." She did. We stood in the doorway, in the pale morning light, her in the bathrobe, me in yesterday's damp blazer, both holding terrible coffee, and something about the ordinariness of the moment. The seagull somewhere outside, the distant sound of the sea, the laminated hospitality sign's spirit of optimism in the breakfast area, made the corner of Seraphine's mouth lift. "I expected to be more embarrassed than this," she said. "About what part specifically?" She considered. "Running away from my wedding in front of 300 people, crying in a stranger's car, being undressed by a woman I met an hour earlier." A pause. "Wearing a motel bathrobe. The bathrobe is genuinely very good," I said. "I'm a little jealous of the bathrobe." And she laughed. It was a small, surprised laugh, the kind that escapes before the person who is laughing can decide whether to allow it. Genuine and uncalculated, and completely different from any expression I had seen on her face at the wedding. It changed her face entirely, made it warmer, younger, made her look like the person she might have been if her life had been arranged slightly differently. I felt something shift in me then, carefully and quietly, and without my permission. "I can take you back," I said, "if you want. We can drive back this morning, and you can deal with it on your own terms, and I'll stay out of it entirely. It would probably be better for both of us." The laugh faded. She looked at me with those serious dark eyes. "Do you want to take me back? What I want isn't the relevant factor. It absolutely is." She tilted her head slightly. "Rowan, do you want to take me back?" A pause. I looked at the terrible coffee. "No," I said. "But what I want and what's wise are quite different things, and I'm trying to be wise." "I'd rather vanish," she said. "For a little while longer, if you'd let me come with you." I thought about Leora's messages. I thought about Piers and the contract, and the calls I hadn't returned. I thought about a ring on the floor, and a woman at a cliff wall, with white knuckles, and a choice she had been delaying for years. "I have a flower studio in Aldermere," I said. "It's small, and it smells like soil, and the heating is unreliable. It's the least impressive place you've ever been." "Good," she said. "That sounds like exactly what I need." The drive to Aldermere took 3 hours. Seraphine was wearing the spare clothes I had in my overnight bag. A blue fisherman's jumper too big for her, and a pair of jeans that required the belt cinched 2 notches further than designed. And her bare feet were up on the dashboard, and she had turned her phone back on and was scrolling through it with the expression of someone reading damage reports from a fire they deliberately started. "Dominic gave an interview," she said at one point. "Not angry, just precise." "What did he say?" "That he's devastated and worried and hopes I get the help I need." She said this completely evenly. "He's devastated and worried in front of a professional lighting setup with his hair done." "Of course he is." "My mother is circulating a statement that refers to—" She looked more closely at the screen, "a private family health matter that requires compassion and privacy." A pause. "She has decided I had a breakdown. Convenient, very. It means no one has to ask what actually happened. No one has to examine whether the marriage was a good idea or whether Dominic is who he appears to be. I simply malfunction. And the story becomes about my instability rather than their coercion." She put the phone down, looked out at the road. "I've been watching my mother do this to people my whole life. I just never thought I'd be the one it happened to." I kept my eyes on the road. "She doesn't know about me yet? Your name has appeared in some of the online commentary. Someone from the venue staff, probably." A careful pause. "They're saying you assisted the kidnapping of Seraphine Vale." The word kidnapping sat between us in the car with considerable weight. "That's," I started. "Absurd," she said. "I know. But that won't stop it being the story until someone tells a better one." She looked at me sideways. "I'm sorry. I've made your life complicated." "I picked up the ring," I said. "I made the choice. We both did," she said quietly. Aldermere is the kind of town that exists at the exact meeting point of picturesque and genuinely ordinary. A coastal apartment town with a high street of independent shops, a working harbor that smells authentically of fish, and a population that is large enough to have a good bakery and small enough that everyone knows which car belongs to who. My flower studio, Bell and Stem, occupied the ground floor of a narrow Victorian terrace on the quieter end of the high street, with a flat above it where I lived. The shop front was painted a dark bottle green that I had chosen myself, and the sign above the door was hand-lettered by Leora, who had considerably better handwriting than me and had done it as a combination of birthday gift and pointed hint that I should get a sign. I was aware, parking outside it, of how it must look to Seraphine, small, unpretentious, cluttered with the visible life of someone who did not have much room to spare, but used the room they had carefully. I had buckets of seasonal stems in the window and a chalkboard sign that said Open Tuesday, and the flat above had a window box that I had planted with herbs in the spring that were now somewhat past their best. "This is yours," she said. She was not being polite. She was looking at the front of the shop the way she had looked at the window of the Verano Grand, except in reverse, not gripping something for stability, but leaning forward slightly, drawn toward it. "It's mine," I said. "Come in." The heating takes 20 minutes to make the place actually warm. Inside, the studio smelled of soil and cut stems and the faint sweetness of dried flowers that had been hanging from the ceiling rafters for months. There were flowers everywhere, working bunches in water buckets along the back wall, drying bunches overhead, a workbench covered in ribbons and wire, and snips of greenery, a small sofa wedged against the side wall under a window that let in the morning light in a long pale stripe. Seraphine stood in the middle of it and turned slowly, looking at everything. She reached up and touched one of the drying bunches overhead, lavender, silver gray, shedding a little. She looked at her fingers. She looked at the handmade mugs on the shelf, above the small kettle in the corner. She looked at the framed botanical prints on the whitewashed wall that I had found in a box at a car boot sale 8 years ago, and never got around to replacing with something more intentional. "It's warm," she said. "The heating's just kicked in," I said. "That's not what I mean." She said it simply and precisely. It's warm in here. Like someone actually lives in it. I put the kettle on. I pulled the sofa cushions out to make space for her to sit, and I made proper coffee from the good bag I kept on the shelf, and I found a clean jumper on the clothes error in the back room and brought it out without comment. Because the fisherman's jumper was mine and smelled of the car, and she should have something dry and clean. She took it without ceremony and pulled it on over the jeans and pushed her dark hair back from her face and sat on the sofa with her legs folded under her, both hands around the coffee mug, and for the first time since the rain-soaked cliff wall, she looked like a person who was somewhere she could breathe. Leora arrived at 11:20. I heard her car before I saw her, because Leora's car makes a very specific sound of mild mechanical disapproval, at speeds above 30. She knocked on the studio door with the particular knock that means I know you're in there and you need to open this door and explain yourself immediately. I went and opened it. Leora Bell is 3 years older than me and approximately 300 times more practical, in the way that people become practical when they spend enough of their childhood watching their younger sibling make decisions driven entirely by the heart. She is a landscape architect, which is a profession that requires you to plan things carefully for years in advance and then wait while things grow. And this has made her both patient and extremely perceptive about when things are about to go wrong. She came through the door and took in the studio in one sweep, and then she saw Seraphine on the sofa. Seraphine looked up. She was still in my jumper, still holding the coffee mug, and there was a small quantity of dried lavender in her hair from the overhead bunch that neither of us had noticed. Leora looked at me with a very specific expression. "Right," she said, in a voice that was managing to be both very controlled and very much not calm. "I need tea, and I need you to explain everything from the beginning," I explained. Leora listened without interrupting, which was either a sign of great restraint or great shock. Seraphine added details where I left them out, with the particular precision of someone who has spent their life in environments where inaccuracy has consequences. When we finished, Leora was quiet for a long time. "You're on 4 news sites," she said finally to Seraphine. 5, Seraphine said. "There's one I spotted this morning that hadn't made the others. The kidnapping thing." "Yes." Leora looked at me. "Rowan," she said in the tone she uses when she is about to say something she knows I am not going to want to hear, "I need you to think very carefully about what role you are playing in this. Because there is a version of this where you are a person who helped someone in distress, which is a good thing. And there is a version of this where you become someone's emergency shelter, which is not a good thing. For you," she added. "It's not a good thing for you." "I'm sitting right here," Seraphine said, without heat. "I know you are," Leora said, and turned to look at her directly. "And I'm not saying anything to her that I wouldn't say to your face. I don't know you. My sister has a good heart, and she tends to give more of it than she should to people who are in crisis. That's not a criticism of you as a person. It's a concern about her." Something moved in Seraphine's face, not offense. Something more complicated. The expression of someone who has just been respected unexpectedly. "That's fair," she said. "I'm not an emergency shelter," I said. Leora looked at me with the patience of someone who is deciding not to point out the evidence against this claim. "No," she said, "you're not." A pause. "Just be careful, both of you." She picked up her tea. "And Seraphine, if you need a solicitor, I know one who handles media situations. She's very good and very discreet." We gave Leora's solicitor contact to Seraphine that afternoon. Seraphine made the call in the back room of the studio, and I could hear her voice through the thin wall, measured, careful, precise. She had switched registers entirely from the woman who had been crying in my car. She was the hotel heiress again, the public figure, navigating a legal situation with the fluency of someone who had been dealing with lawyers since she was old enough to read contracts. It was the first time I properly understood that she was both things, the woman in the bathrobe who laughed unexpectedly at terrible coffee, and the woman who had been raised to manage crises with silk gloves. I went and tended to the flowers in the workbench buckets. I trimmed stems and changed water, and tried to think carefully and clearly about what I was doing, and found I could not think clearly about it at all, which was in itself a kind of information. She came out of the back room looking slightly less taut. "She's going to request a statement from the venue confirming I left voluntarily," she said, "which will deal with the kidnapping claim. And she recommends I say nothing publicly until I'm ready to control the narrative." A pause. "Which is the first useful thing anyone has said to me in 3 days." "Are you hungry?" I said. "There's a Portuguese place 2 streets over. They have the best soup in the county, and they are completely indifferent to local news." She looked at me. "You're feeding me soup. I'm going to feed us both soup," I said. "And then we're going to go to the fish market, because I have 3 orders due Friday, and I need dahlias. And you can come with me or stay here." Either is fine. She came with me. We walked to the fish market, which also sold flowers in the same way that coastal markets sell whatever is available, and I found my dahlias. A deep burgundy variety that I had been planning to use in a centerpiece installation. And Seraphine walked beside me without speaking for a while, and then, at one of the cutting tables, picked up a stem of something yellow and ornate and turned it in her hands. "What is this?" she said. "Rudbeckia, coneflower. It's incredibly easy to work with." "Stronger than it looks." I paused. "Most people overlook it for peonies and roses." She turned it once more, looking at it, and then placed it very deliberately in my bunch. "For the order," she said, as if she needed a reason. I looked at the yellow flower in the dark burgundy bunch. It looked wrong, and then for a moment looked completely right, the way that unexpected things sometimes do. "For the order," I agreed. The days that followed were strange and specific, in a way that I did not quite have the vocabulary for. Seraphine stayed. She slept on the sofa in the studio the first night, and I did not argue, because arguing felt like pretending the situation was more manageable than it was, and I have never been good at pretending. She was, I discovered, a person who occupied space quietly, who woke early and made coffee without being asked, and did not leave cups in inconvenient places, who stood at the back wall looking at the flower orders with the focused attention of someone learning the rules of a world that interests them. She asked questions about flowers that were not simple questions, about what makes an arrangement feel alive rather than arranged, about how you choose what to leave out as well as what to put in. I found myself explaining things I had never tried to explain out loud before. She learned to trim dahlias badly, but with great sincerity. She trimmed the same stem 4 times before getting the angle right, and then held it up with an expression of genuine satisfaction that made me turn away to hide whatever was happening to my face. On the 3rd day, Dominic Wren gave a second interview. I watched it on my laptop while Seraphine was upstairs in my flat changing. He was sitting in a hotel lobby, very well lit, wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly rent, and he was performing devastation in the way that very skilled performers perform things, convincingly and with absolute calculation. He said that he loved Seraphine deeply and was frightened for her. He said that she had been under considerable pressure, and he hoped she was getting the support she needed. He said, with a specific pause that was designed to sound like restraint, that there were people around her who had exploited her vulnerability, and that he hoped those people understood the seriousness of what they had done. The camera cut to a reporter who named me. I closed the laptop. Seraphine came downstairs and saw my face and said immediately, "What happened?" I told her. She sat down on the edge of the workbench. Her expression went through something I watched happen in real time, from anger to something colder and more considered. "He will have known exactly what he was doing with that word," she said. "Exploited. Yes, I'm going to deal with it." "I know, but can I say something first?" I waited. She nodded. "I'm not afraid of Dominic Wren. I'm afraid of being a footnote in the story of your escape, of being the woman you happened to run toward instead of the woman you chose to run toward." I paused. "They're different things, and I need to know which one I am before this goes any further." The studio was very quiet. Outside, a seagull crossed the window. Seraphine looked at me for a long time. Not the assessing look she had given me at the cliff wall. Something rawer and more considered than that. "I don't know yet," she said, and the honesty of it, the refusal to give me a comfortable answer, was exactly what I needed. I know that I am not running toward you as a strategy. I know that when I am here, I feel less afraid than I have felt in years. I know that you are the first person in recent memory who has told me what you actually think instead of what you believe I want to hear. She looked down at her hands. Whether that is love, or whether it is simply the feeling of being treated like a full human being by someone trustworthy, I am not entirely sure yet. Is that honest enough? Yes, I said. That is honest enough. Dominic came himself on the 5th day. He had someone with him, a large, quiet man who stayed by the car. And he came into the studio with the ease of a person who is accustomed to entering spaces and having them rearrange around him. He was exactly as handsome in person as on the screen, and entirely uninteresting up close in the way that things without warmth are uninteresting. He looked around my studio with the specific expression of someone cataloging it as evidence. He looked at me. Then he smiled, and the smile was kind and warm and told me nothing whatsoever about what was behind it. "You're Rowan Bell," he said. "I am. Thank you for looking after Seraphine. She can be impulsive in moments of stress. I'm sure you understood that you were helping someone in a difficult state." "I understood exactly what was happening," I said. The smile held. "Of course. Then you'll understand that the best thing for her now is to come home, where her family can support her properly, rather than—" He glanced around the studio with a brief, entirely controlled flick of his eyes. "Impose on someone who barely knows her." "She's not imposing," I said. "Rowan." He said my name the way people say names when they want you to feel seen and managed at the same time. "I want to be direct with you. You are a talented florist in a small town, and you have accidentally become part of a immediacy situation that is quite beyond your experience. I would like to make sure you are compensated for your time and your inconvenience." He said the word carefully, precisely. "And I would like to make sure that Seraphine's private situation remains private. Those two things can happen together very simply. He was offering me money, not explicitly. Not yet. But the architecture of the offer was there, being assembled piece by piece in front of me, and I felt, more than anything, a kind of tired clarity. "Seraphine is upstairs," I said. "If you'd like to talk to her, you can go to the door at the side of the building. I think it would be better if you. She is a grown woman. She is here by choice. She has a solicitor." I held the door open. "I won't be an intermediary between you. If you'd like to speak to her directly, she's upstairs. Otherwise, the door." He looked at me. Something moved behind the warm smile that was not warm. "You'll get bored of this," he said, very quietly. "She gets bored of things, of people. Ask her former assistants. Ask the designers she replaced every 2 years because they stopped holding her interest." A pause. "You're very charming in your own way, very genuine. It's exactly the kind of thing that appeals to her when she's in a certain state. But you're not her world. You're her detour." I said nothing. He left. I stood in the studio and held the door closed for a moment after the sound of his car disappeared. And I let what he had said sit in me the way that things sit when they are designed to wound and some part of you wonders if they might be right. Then I let it go, not because it hadn't landed, but because the alternative was letting him be the author of my story, and he had not earned that. Seraphine came downstairs 20 minutes later. She had heard the car. She had heard voices. Her eyes went to my face. "What did he say?" she said. "What you'd expect. Rowan, that I'm your detour." I said it simply, no drama. "That you get bored of things." Her face shifted. Something both fierce and deeply unhappy crossed it. "He sent his assistant to threaten my solicitor last week," she said. "I was going to tell you." I handled it. A pause. "He said things to you to make you doubt me." "I know," I said. "He's not wrong that there's a risk. He's just not the one I want to hear it from." She crossed the studio toward me and stopped closer than she normally stood, and looked up at me with an expression that was not what I had expected from this conversation. Not apologetic, not defensive. Just honest and present, and something else. Something that had been building in the quiet days of soup and dahlias and bad questions about flower geometry into something that had weight and direction. "I have spent my entire life being someone's asset," she said, "someone's symbol, someone's future plan. I have never been anyone's present tense." She reached up and tucked a piece of dried lavender from behind my ear. It had transferred, apparently, from her hair, and then she did not move her hand away immediately. Just rested it at my jaw for a moment, light and deliberate. You are the first person I have met in a very long time who sees me as though I am actually in the room. Seraphine. I know. She searched my face. I know what you're afraid of. You're afraid that I am choosing you because you represent freedom, and that when the danger passes and the novelty fades, I will look up and realize I traded one comfortable cage for another inconvenient person. Her thumb brushed my jaw once. Barely. I'm afraid of the same thing. I am afraid I am not a person who gets to have something real, because real things require you to stay, and I have spent my whole life being told my job is to look beautiful and leave quietly when asked. You haven't left quietly, I said. My voice came out lower than I intended. No, she said, I haven't, and she kissed me. It was not dramatic. It was quiet and deliberate, and very certain, the way she did most things once she had decided to do them, and it lasted only a moment before she pulled back to look at me with something in her expression that was asking a question. I answered it. The second time was less careful. The second time she made a small sound against my mouth that was relief as much as anything else, relief and recognition and the particular recklessness of doing something you have been not doing for too long. I held her face in both hands and kissed her back in the fading afternoon light of the studio, among the hanging dried flowers and the buckets of dahlias, and the rudbeckia she had added to my order, and it was tender and fierce and confused and completely genuine, and I did not think about Dominic or Celeste or the news sites or the kidnapping claim or my professional reputation or Leora's warnings, because all of those things existed in some other register of reality from the one I was currently in. When we stopped, we were both slightly out of breath. She rested her forehead against mine. I'm afraid, she said. So am I said. That doesn't mean we're wrong. But fear does not resolve itself simply because it's named. In the days that followed, I watched both of us navigate it in our different ways. Me by becoming slightly more careful, slightly more measured, watching myself for signs that I was confusing love with rescue and checking, regularly, that they felt different. They did. They felt entirely different. Love, I was learning, was not the urge to save someone. It was the specific gravity of wanting to be in a room with them when no one needed saving, when the crisis had passed and the adrenaline had long since settled, and finding you still wanted to stay. Seraphine navigated her fear by, periodically, trying to protect me at the expense of herself. She had a habit, I was beginning to recognize it, of withdrawing when things became visible. Not from me exactly, from the situation, from the parts of it that made her feel like a liability. I found her composing a message to her solicitor one morning that would have, if sent, effectively distanced her from me in the public record, and I took her phone gently out of her hands and put it down. Don't, I said. Don't disappear in the parts that matter. She looked at me. I'm trying to protect you. I know, stop. I sat down beside her on the sofa. If you want to protect me, be honest. Be present. Let me make my own decisions about what I'm willing to risk. That's how you protect me. She looked at my hands. Then she picked up her phone, deleted the draft, and put it away. I haven't been good at letting people make their own decisions, she said. I know, I said. You've mostly been surrounded by people who made yours. It makes sense it goes both ways. The charity gala was Celeste Vale's doing. Seraphine received the invitation to a foundation gala at the Ormond, a luxury hotel her family owned in the city, with the expression of a chess player recognizing an opponent's move. Celeste had timed it precisely, 3 weeks after the wedding, enough time for the initial scandal to have settled into narrative, and she had framed it as a family event, a show of unity, a chance for Seraphine to be seen as stable and reputable, and affiliated with the family name. She wants me to appear, Seraphine said, on her terms. Are you going? I said. Yes. A pause. But on mine. She looked at me. Come with me. As your event florist? As the woman I'm seeing, she said evenly. Openly. Not hidden, not managed, not presented as an assistant or a friend or a support person. As Rowan Bell, who is with me, a beat. If you want to come. I thought about Dominic's smile and his careful word, exploited. I thought about Celeste Vale, and her statement about private family health matters. I thought about the kidnapping claim and Piers and the contract I had certainly lost, and the news sites with my name in them. "What should I wear?" I said. Leora cried, which was extraordinary. Leora was not a crier. She stood in my flat above the studio on the evening before the gala, and looked at me getting ready and said nothing for a moment, and then made a sound that she immediately denied was crying and went to make tea very quickly. "I'm not crying," she said from the kitchen. "I know," I said. A kettle being aggressively filled. "I told you to be careful." "I know, and you were extremely not careful." "I know." A pause. "She's good, Rowan." Leora appeared in the doorway with the kettle. "She's better than I thought, actually. When I met her, I was thinking about what you needed, and not about her, and that wasn't entirely fair." She looked at the kettle. "She's very good." "I know," I said for the third time. "Don't get complacent," Leora said. And that was as close to a blessing as she was going to get. The Ormonde was the kind of hotel that makes a statement simply by existing. A converted Edwardian bank building in the heart of the city. All soaring ceilings, and original plasterwork, and enormous floral arrangements in the lobby that I looked at. Professionally, and thought could be about 30% better, with some compositional rearranging. The gala was for the Vale Family Foundation, which funded arts education programs, and the guest list was the expected configuration of wealthy people and their careful associates. There were cameras at the entrance. We arrived together. I don't know what I expected. Some version of drama, probably, or a managed Celeste Vale greeting that said nothing and meant everything. But what actually happened was quieter and more specific than that. We came through the main entrance of the Ormond, and the people nearest the door did that thing where they look, and then lo again, the double take that indicates recognition colliding with surprise. And Seraphine walked beside me with her hand not quite holding mine. Not yet, not publicly, not until she had made the choice she needed to make. And her back perfectly straight and her expression composed and beautiful and completely present. Dominic was there. He saw us from across the room, and his expression went through something very fast that was not grief. Celeste Vale appeared at the top of the marble stairs. She was wearing navy and diamonds, and her expression was exactly the expression I had seen in the bridal suite. Complete, composed, entirely legible if you knew what to look for. She looked at Seraphine. She looked at me. She descended the stairs. "Seraphine," she said. "I'm glad you came, Mother." Seraphine's voice was even. "This is Rowan Bell." "I know who she is," Celeste said. Not rudely, precisely. She looked at me. "Miss Bell, Mrs. Vale," I said. A moment that could have been many things. Celeste Vale looked at her daughter with an expression that was not cold, or not only cold. There was something underneath the control that looked almost like fear, and I thought about what Seraphine had told me. That her mother believed love was a weakness. I thought about what it costs a person to believe that. The specific loneliness of a life organized around managing everything that might hurt you. "We should speak privately," Celeste said to Seraphine. "Yes," Seraphine said, "we should. But not tonight." A pause. "Tonight, I would like to simply be here." The conversation happened later in the evening, when the gala was in full swing, and Dominic had made 3 quiet attempts to engineer a moment alone with Seraphine, all of which she declined with the polished expertise of someone who had been declining things she didn't want since childhood. And a journalist had approached me with the specific alertness of a person who has an angle in mind. The journalist was young and sharp and not unkind, and she asked me whether I had abducted Seraphine Vale and whether I was a paid operative, and whether I understood the potential legal consequences of what I had done, all in the precise rapid-fire style of someone who had prepared the questions and intended to run the story regardless of the answers. I looked at her. I thought about Rowan Bell, floral designer of Aldermere, 32 small and unglamorous victories ago. I thought about the ring on the floor, and the white-knuckled hands on the window ledge, and the terrible coffee, and the dahlias, and the rudbeckia, and the moment in the studio when I had held a face in both my hands and knew, with a clarity I could not talk myself out of, that I was not rescuing anyone. I was falling in love with someone who was falling in love with me. "I am Rowan Bell," I said. I run a flower studio in Aldermere. I was working at the Verano Grand when I found a wedding ring that had been left on the floor. I returned it to the person it belonged to. She asked me to drive her somewhere, and I did. I paused. She is not a scandal, and she is not a crisis. She is a woman who made a difficult decision, and I am a woman who helped her make it. That's the whole story. The journalist opened her mouth. And I'm not a rescuer, I said. I didn't save anyone. She saved herself. Across the room, Seraphine was watching me. I don't know how long she had been watching. Her expression was something I did not have a word for at the time. Would need weeks to name properly, but can describe it. It was the expression of a person who has just been seen clearly, fully, without condition, by someone who is not trying to manage them or own them or place them in a narrative, and who recognizes the feeling because they have been waiting for it their whole life. She excused herself from the conversation she was in and walked across the room toward me. She took my hand, not quietly, not hidden. In the middle of the Ormond ballroom, with cameras and Celeste Vale and Dominic Wren and 300 of the city's most attentive social spectators present. She took my hand and held it and stood beside me and faced the room. Dominic left shortly after. I do not know what he said on the way out. I was not watching him. Celeste Vale did not leave. She stood at the top of the marble stairs for a long time, looking at her daughter. And then something happened that I had not expected. She descended the stairs again. She crossed the floor. She stopped in front of Seraphine, and the two of them looked at each other, and I felt Seraphine's hand tightened around mine, bracing. Celeste looked at me, then at Seraphine, then back at me. "Miss Bell," she said. "I understand you work with flowers." "I do," I said, carefully. "We use a design firm for the Foundation's events." A pause. "They are very reliable and extremely safe, and everything they produce looks exactly like what you'd expect." Another pause, each word measured precisely. "I find I am considering whether that is what I want." It was not an apology. Celeste Vale was not going to apologize, and I did not expect her to, and I was not sure I needed it from her. But it was something. It was the first word in a different kind of conversation, and she was choosing to say it, and I recognized that it cost her. "I'd be happy to discuss it," I said. She nodded once. She turned and went back toward the upper level of the gala, and the particular quality of her spine said, "We will not speak of this again tonight, but we will speak of it again, and that is enough." Seraphine breathed beside me, a long, slow, releasing breath. "That's the most I've ever seen her offer," she said. "I know. She'll backslide. She'll try to control things. She'll never stop believing that she knows better. Probably," I said. "But she also just moved slightly, which means she can." Seraphine looked at our joined hands. Then she looked at me. "Rowan Bell," she said, with something in her voice that was its own kind of morning light. "Seraphine Vale," I said. There was a period after the gala that I can only describe as the long settling, the weeks and months in which the crisis receded and the reality emerged in its place, which is always the more interesting thing. The lawsuit threats from Dominic's people went nowhere because Seraphine's solicitor was, as Leora had promised, very good. The kidnapping story died when the venue confirmed, in writing, that Seraphine had left willingly. Celeste Vale released a public statement that said very little and contradicted the health matter narrative, which was the closest she was going to come to a correction. Dominic gave one more interview in which he seemed finally to run out of things to perform, and after that he became simply a story that was no longer moving. Seraphine began the process of separating her own assets from her family's operational control. Not a rupture, not a burning, but a careful, documented negotiation that took months and several very expensive lawyers, and required a specific kind of patience that she had, it turned out, in abundance when she was applying it to something she actually wanted. She began to build something of her own, a hospitality project she had been designing in her head for years, a small boutique property on the coast that would be, as she described it, the opposite of everything the Vale name had built. Human scale, warm, made for people who wanted to be somewhere, not just to be seen somewhere. She asked me to do the flowers. I said yes. Obviously, I said yes. There was one evening, about 4 months after the gala, when Seraphine came down to the studio from the flat. She was spending most of her time in Aldermere now, the luxury suite in the city increasingly unlived in. A fact she mentioned with the satisfied precision of someone checking something off a list. And she had a small white box in her hand. "I want to show you something," she said. "I was trimming autumn stems at the bench." I looked at the box. "I sent the ring away," she said, "after I left the venue. I kept it because I didn't know what to do with it, and I didn't want to simply throw it out, because it is a real object and it had real weight, and whatever it represented, I wanted to deal with it honestly, rather than just dispose of it." She opened the box. Inside were 2 bands, simple, narrow, one yellow gold and one slightly paler. The diamond is gone. The setting is different. I had it made into 2 things instead of one, which felt right. She looked at me. "I'm not proposing. I want to be very clear about that. We have been together for 4 months, and we are still learning each other, and I have not prepared a speech." A slight smile. "But I wanted to give you this, and I wanted to say, I know what you are afraid of. You are afraid of being someone's place to escape to, rather than someone's reason to stay. I want you to know, with the specific weight of something that has been transformed from a thing I refused into something I actually want. I am staying. I intend to stay, not because I have nowhere left to run, because there is nowhere I would rather be." She placed one of the bands on the workbench in front of me, slid the other onto her own right hand. I looked at it. I thought about the first ring, cold and perfect and abandoned on the floor of a bridal suite, and about this one, warm and plain and offered freely. I picked it up. I held it the way she had held the original on the cliff wall, turning it once between my fingers, feeling its weight. Then I put it on. She was watching me. "I'm staying too," I said. For the record, she said. "Good." Outside, the October sea was doing what the October sea does in this part of the world, working itself into something gray and enormous and alive, the way the coast has been doing since, before anyone was here to watch it, and will continue to do long after us. The studios smelled of chrysanthemums and soil, and the particular warmth of a room that has been inhabited with intention. The rudbeckia she had first placed in my bunch was dried now, fixed to the wall above the door in a small frame I had made from wire and driftwood, yellow and ridiculous, and hers. Seraphine looked at the frame. She had never said anything about it being up there. I had put it up 6 weeks after she placed the flower in my order, and she had come into the studio, looked at it, and then looked away, and said nothing, which was its own kind of language. "I've been thinking about the project name," she said, "for the Coastal Hotel. And I want to call it something that has nothing to do with my family name, and nothing to do with achievement, and nothing to do with how impressive it is." She considered the rudbeckia in its frame. "I want to call it something that is just a feeling. Something that means being somewhere you didn't expect to arrive at, that turned out to be exactly where you needed to be." I looked at her. She was standing in the autumn light of my studio with a gold band on her right hand and dried flowers in her hair and my jumper on, and she was entirely herself. Seraphine Vale, who had been designed to be perfect and had chosen instead to be real, and who had walked through a terrace door in a storm and met a woman with a ring and said please and changed everything. "I'll think about it," she said. "You'll find the right word," I said. She smiled, and the particular quality of that smile, unguarded, present, here, was better than any word I could have offered her. She reached out and tucked a rudbeckia petal back into the frame where it had come loose at the edge, precise and careful, and then she turned back to me, and the October sea moved outside, and the flowers dried above us, and we were exactly where we were, which was improbably and completely enough. The ring she had left on the floor of the bridal suite was gone. The life it had been asked to seal was gone with it. What remained was this: a small studio suite in a small town, 2 bands of gold made from a refusal, and the extraordinary ordinary fact of a woman who had stopped running and started arriving, who came through the door every morning and stayed. She stayed, I let her, we stayed together.